We have come to the American Heritage Museum. With me here is Rob Collings, the Executive Director of the Collings Foundation. Thanks for appearing. First question is, where are we?
Well, we're about 20 miles west of Boston in Stowe, Massachusetts. So we're drawing between New York and the Boston market. We're in a very historic area because about 12 miles away from here is Battle Road and the Old North Bridge. So this is the kind of the epicenter of what we believe from Massachusetts is the start of the American Revolution.
What happened to the whole Tea Party business?
No, that was a little closer into Boston.
So how would you get here as a tourist?
Boston is obviously the closest area to fly into, but also there's Manchester and Providence or Hartford, and we're about an hour from each of them.
All right. So this is the American Heritage Museum. This is basically, right now, the premier tank museum in the US, but the word tank is not in the title. Why is this?
It's not in the title because we want to tell a human story and not just be about tanks. While tanks are obviously a large part of the collection, the majority of the collection, we want to be talking about what it was like for the guys and even the women who served in these vehicles and the human interest stories, not just the technical stories.
So how are you going to do that? Now, the museum as we have here is not finished. So if we come back during the grand opening and we're going to get these stories, how are these stories going to be interpreted and presented to the people that are visiting?
Yeah. We want the whole museum to be very immersive. So we have a lot of theaters in here. We have a World War I trench experience, which you go into the trench, and it's this whole audio-visual presentation. We have another area called War Clouds. How did World War II get started? It's featuring artifacts, but also audio-visual that's telling you the story. You look at the Panther or the Stug or the 222 or Pershing or even the T-72, they're amazing examples of the vehicles. We want people to be able to see them as much as they can. We don't want people climbing on them. That was one reason for having this mezzanine structure where you can look down on the vehicles, not just getting the dog's eye view from down below, but see the Panther and its mass from above, to look down into a scout car, to see more of the vehicles. That's highly important. Having hatches open, having displays around them. This winter, we're doing a lot of the scenic work. We want these vehicles to look like they did in theater. The dirt around them, the sand in the desert, the snow in Bastogne, whatever it might be, to give you that impression that you're going back in history.
Giant space heaters.
Well, when you go into the World War I trench, it'll be cooler. It is definitely cooler when you go in there. But we did not want to be the biggest. We're never going to compete with Bovington or Seymour on the number of vehicles, nor do we want to. We want to display them, though, in a more compelling manner than just lining up vehicles. And that's why they're all in their situational timeline. So as you go through, you're going through in a chronological order. So historically, we're not just about technology, that's part of it, but historically, how do these vehicles fit into their space? How did they change the world? How did an Abrams change the world? How did the Panther change the world or impact the world? That story is being told. And then the human side, to have the artifacts in the display cases that will be telling a bit of a tale of what it was like for the crew serving on these. And the human stories as well of maybe Maria Oktoberskaya over by the T-34-76, how we had female tank crew members and even commanders in World War II in the Soviet Army.
And of course we now have them on the M1 Abrams.
Yes.
So your building is brand new and it's already filled.
Yeah.
Does this mean that you're not going to expand anymore, or?
Doesn't mean that. Obviously, we are involved in more than just armor. So there will be expansion here with aviation artifacts as well. We like to have the stories intertwined. So that's why you'll see an ME-109 here.
Yeah.
You'll see some aircraft that fit in with the history. The LCVP, the Higgins boat, obviously fitting in with the history. A lot of these artifacts are telling more of a story when they're together than just having armor segregated by itself from aviation.
Well, because they were never used on their own to begin with.
The war was from the dirt all the way up to 35,000 feet at that time.
Speaking of the aircraft, so you're gonna have those aircraft that you do on the Wings of Freedom tour, if people are coming here to the AHM and they're expecting to see those aircraft here?
Don't expect to see them here.
Okay.
Those aircraft are traveling 10 months out of the year. The other 2 months they're in maintenance in Florida. And the airfield, the private airfield we have here, is not big enough for a B-17 or B-24.
Fair enough. So, of course, we're standing next to a piece of steel from the World Trade Center, and this is one of the big questions. So, for you and I, we walk up, we know exactly what we're looking at immediately. There are now, next year, there will be people fighting in Afghanistan who were not born when that happened, and they were going to come up to this. Maybe they'll figure it out, maybe they won't. How does this generational problem affect this collection that basically stops?
It is hard for us to imagine this because you were, I would say, exactly where we were at that moment at 9 a.m. on September 11th and what we were doing. We will never forget it. And especially up here in the Northeast, most people lost friends at that day. So that piece of steel is a lot more than steel to us. It's a very sacred monument. But you're absolutely right. I've heard a number that 1/3 of the American public was not alive at that time or cognizant of the event of a younger age to really know what 9/11 is. So we're going to have to interpret that much like you or I might have to read something on Pearl Harbor. We didn't live through that event. So there will be interpretation around that steel in this whole global war on terror area, which features an Abrams tank and some of the EOD robots like the Talon and PackBot. I won't tell you too much about it because it's going to be going in this winter and we want it to be a surprise, but it is a Pentagon that goes around it. So we're going to be trying to draw in all of those events. And also for us in Boston in particular, we had some other events that affected us, not necessarily ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but the marathon bombing had a major impact to people in this town. So we'll be tying in all of these events post 9/11 in this gallery.
So is there going to be a Cold War battle, a Korean War weekend or something like that?
Yeah, we do expect to have historical weekend events. So we have a major battle for the airfield. We'll probably be adding other events and certainly having them themed. We don't want to just take out a Sherman and an M60 and a World War I tank all together. They don't have a cohesive story, unless you're telling the story of evolution, in which case it would. But we would want to try and keep that cohesive story. Are we going to have a Cold War driving day? That's very possible. Battle of the Bulge driving day? Talk to the Marine Corps on that one.
I might outrank them.
That's good. I want to get that out. That would be spectacular. But we will bring vehicles out and drive them at different times. Also, we're trying to bring in people, historical people, whether they're veterans or can talk authoritatively and have a lecture series.
Right, so you had Clarence Smoyer out here.
Our inaugural kickoff was very spectacular to have Clarence Smoyer and Adam Makos, who's just written the book, Spearhead, on Clarence and his experience, not just Clarence, but Gustav on the other side, the German perspective. And we want to tell those perspectives. We would love to have some German tankers in here. That would be phenomenal, to have a German and American in a panel talking about their experiences. Or if we move forward, we want to have people talking about their experiences, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan, all the way through. So our history is not stagnant. We're not stopping at World War II. And I think that does differentiate us from some other collections that we definitely love the post-war history as well. And I think if you look at our Gulf War I area, that's got to be one of the best in the world with a Scud missile launcher anchoring it and some other important vehicles.
Vietnam is, well, you don't see very many tank museums have a Vietnam section with the M48 and the PT-76 there.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a case in point for this interpretation of the human side, and okay, I've got a side advantage because I was an M1 commander, but the M1 you mentioned has the story. How would you present this story to the visitors?
This M1A1 is the only one on public display in the world. It's a very special tank. We're fortunate to have this on loan from the National Marine Corps Museum. But most of all, as people come through, not as it iconic, you know these vehicles inside out and backwards. The first M1A1 I ever saw was this one, because you grow up, you go to air shows, you see F-15s, F-16s, but you don't get a chance to see these in person. And that's really special. But most of all, when you come around the corner and you see it, you're also confronted, if you will, with the story, the reality of war. Because this particular vehicle on August 3rd, 2006, hit an IED, and the commander, Sergeant Giorgiola, was killed. So that it really brings the reality of war to the entire museum. As you walk around, There are some vehicles in here. The crew might have been killed in them. We don't know. It's anonymous if they are. The IS-2 is an example. We just don't know enough about its history to know what happened. But this, conclusively, we do. And we're fortunate to have the surviving crew members, the driver, the gunner, and the loader, were up here along with Giorgiola's widow, the gunner from the vehicle behind, and the platoon sergeant telling their story. So it's on a 3-screen video over here, and I'll tell you, most people do not leave there without a tear in their eye, because it brings the humanity of it, the reality of this is a vehicle someone was killed in fighting for us. But also they're touching on the rules of engagement and the frustration that a lot of our armed service members rightfully feel, when they're serving in Iraq and Afghanistan.
True, but then again, the rules are there for a purpose. So
Yeah.
can't liberate the country by killing it.
No.
Although we did cut down on speeding a lot. All right. So for the last couple of months, you've had a soft opening, whereas it has been open to the public, but you're not open right now. You are now officially closed for the winter.
We are officially closed for the winter. We're going to be going back and doing a lot of the interpretive work, the reader rails, the area plinths, the scenics, the display cases, to make it a more rich and immersive experience. There are some additional presentations, one called The War in Europe, which will be we believe the world's largest object theater, where we're lighting up individual vehicles as it's being talked about, and images shown on the screen of those vehicles in action. Very exciting for us to do that, along with the Clash of Steel and some other aspects. And we're going to be opening up in April. That will be our grand opening. So the soft opening has not been advertised. We've just had people coming in because we want to start getting feedback. We also want to start working on a lot of this because, as I said, it's not a museum with just signage and vehicles lined up. We want it to be immersive. And that comes at kind of the Disney cost of, does everything work quite right?
So I'm fairly sure that we in World of Tanks will advertise when we have a date when you guys are opening. But just in case somebody wants to keep track of what you guys are doing over the course of the next few months, where would they go to keep track of things?
They can go to our website. You can go to collingsfoundation.org or American Heritage Museum to keep an eye on that. We will be opening in April, some date in April, early April of 2019, and certainly keep an eye on your blog too, and I'm sure you'll be talking about it, and I know you'll be here.
I will be indeed. Are you taking volunteers?
Yes, we are. We have a great group of volunteers right now that are part of this museum, and folks that want to come out and be part of it, we would like them to be part of it.
Any criteria? Did it have to be tankers themselves, or?
We have a wonderful group of tankers that are part of this, the Brotherhood of Tankers that have been out here, but that's not a criteria. It's nice, but in actuality, these guys want to hang out around certain vehicles. I'm going to tell you, it's mostly the M60 and the Abrams they're hanging out around because that's what they were serving on. Some on the M48. And people have a passion for this and an interest in the history and want to convey that history to the folks coming through. And it might be anywhere from the World War I era to the present. Come on out.
Yeah, fantastic then. Well, thanks for the chat.
Yes, thank you very much. Good to see you again.